It's about basically it's about a murder. Are you familiar with green on blue, that phenomenon? In which the Afghan security forces kill coalition forces. So it was about one of those stories that happened in August, trying to track down the people involved. Maybe a novel, but certainly an article. Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the reasons I love fiction is because the project seems to me to be to stand inside somebody's shoes. And I think the great fiction writers are able to know without knowing, you know, so they don't necessarily have to be in the situation their characters are in, but it sure helps. And so it helps with the telling detail, and it helps to, you know, to get under the skin of what you're trying to write about. Yeah, I love being able to go out and travel and do this kind of research, and the people I meet and the things I get to see feels like a great privilege to me a lot of the time. Yeah, I think I would have to double check the number, but someone said to me this statistic the other day that caught me. And they said that of total media coverage, total news presented in the United States in the last year, only 2% of it concerned Afghanistan, for example. So the world is a big, complicated place, but it seems to me that if a country is at war and expends as much of its resources and blood and treasure as the United States of America has on these wars, then I want to know more about it. And so I was always interested and sometimes troubled by the idea that there was not very much attention being paid to these situations. You could make the same argument for, it turns me into a graduate student, but you could make the same argument about radical poverty or about any number of sort of crises. But this was the one that I was interested in. I think that it is not a conspiracy, it is a confluence of events. So there are senior editors who care a lot about the war, but you can care a lot about the war but still have to answer to somebody because you need to sell advertisements. And you need to do that because you need to keep your kids in private school. And if you don't keep your kids in private school, then they don't get to become doctors. And if they don't get to become doctors, then they don't get to cure cancer. And if we don't cure cancer, then we're all going to die, you know? So it's not one thing or another, it's the confluence of... Important to me. Yeah. And I don't know how important it is to the larger conversation about these, but if the intellectual project and the moral project of everything I'm trying to do is assembled one interview, one moment at a time, then this is very important to me, going and seeing there. But it's not what I do most of the time. It's not what I do every day. I wrote a few articles for Time while I was there, and there are some of the details get in there, so the Madrasa al-Mustansiria and that one with Maui, the guy with the knife, those were both sort of taken from the reporting for Time, but a lot of this stuff was outside of that and was other things I was thinking about. Yeah, what you decide to write about. You know a book called The Journalist and the Murderer by Janet Malcolm? It's brilliant on this topic also. And Joan Didion also writes about this. And you know, writing is about choices. And just having an awareness of the implications of the choices that you make for every sentence is something that I was thinking more and more about, and am thinking more and more about. And it's not always the key to good writing, that kind of granular detail. But in situations like that, where it seems it's extremely fast, and I was trying to remember very vividly and specifically what exactly had happened, every detail seemed to me to have a lot of import. I had not read the French translation, so I was reading it yesterday or the day before. And that, I don't know why, but that line, it was not my favorite line anymore. It seemed a little bit macho or a little bit crazy or a little bit like pretending to be a war reporter. It seemed a little bit melodramatic to me. a line that says, the things you don't write about are the ones that you care most about. And the reason it seemed melodramatic to me was because it implied that you had seen things that were very dramatic, but that you would not share them with someone. And that's not the case, really. And so I think that I stand by the line, because you do think a lot, or I do at least think a lot, about what doesn't go into the books. But the line still seems to me now to have this sort of melodramatic, macho sense, which I wish I could fix a little bit. He's like a killer spy, so of course he doesn't talk a lot. I think I talk a lot more than the killer spy in the book. Yeah, that's part of it. Because you can get away with anything. I mean, fiction. It's fiction. You can do anything you want.
Yeah.
And that's liberating. The great luxury of fiction. And then the trick is just making it consistent. Making it believable even though you're making it all up. Well, the reason I have that thing up there, and the reason it's important to me to distinguish between war at Harvard and the end of major combat operations, I just think labeling is extremely important. I think that when you write nonfiction, you have a responsibility to try to represent your experience as accurately as possible. And I don't think that nonfiction or fiction is more powerful, one is better than the other, but I think that the labeling is extremely important, because nonfiction is the basis for evidence in a court, for hearings in the Senate, for whatever. And I am like a positivist. I believe in the possibility of progress on the basis of understanding causality. The distinction is important to me. That's why I put something like that in the front of that book. I know, but that's why fiction is fun. Oh, I would say it's the dark side, but I can imagine people who would say it's not particularly dark. It just is pragmatic.
Yeah.
But it seems a little bit shady to me sometimes. At least, this book is a conspiracy theory. It's in the tradition of spy novels, I hope. And conspiracy theories are great fun. I'm trying to think of what's an old conspiracy theory. The assassination of Julius Caesar. There's a conspiracy theory. They make for great yarns, conspiracy theories. I love The X-Files. Remember that television show? Probably had more influence on me than it should have. Well, not that it should have, but I don't know why. That was a great conspiracy theory show. Or them, both. And they were great because especially Graham Greene, what seemed like a conspiracy was boiled down to just the desires of the people involved. So like The Quiet American, for example, a book that I care about a lot. And it looks like a conspiracy theory from the outside, but when you get to know the characters, it's not a conspiracy, it just is a series of desires. I wish I could remember who said this line, but there's a great line about that fiction is news that stays news. And I think that I would like my books to be like that. I hope. It's a Lakota prayer. Lakota, the Native Americans with the Western United States. And it's about that. It's about how everything is connected. And it's an old idea. And it's about the plant nation. It's basically the guys giving thanks to the plant nation, the mineral nation. It's a little bit like New Agey, but yeah, everything seems connected to me. I hope that they're all sort of fractals. what I like about writing is that the interpretations are as various as the readers. Everything you just said is part of that image for me. And everything that we are capable of imagining for that image, I think, contributes to the strength of the writing, such as it is. You ever read Orwell, George Orwell?
Yeah.
Have you read, I just read Homage to Catalonia, which I'd never read before. It was a brilliant book, war book. And I've been trying to remember where I read this quote from him. I think it was in a letter. And he says that since whatever the year was, maybe it was the early 30s, he writes that everything I have written has been against fascism, totalitarianism, and in defense of or for socialism as he understands it, as I understand it. And I think that's a really interesting idea. But it's not the way that I operate, certainly. And I admire Orwell so much, and I admire that there's ambiguity in what he writes, but even so, he is trying to make a political point at all, or at least he says he is. I mean, without being like earnest and didactic, I think that the structural inequities of the United States are extremely present in its institutions of higher learning. I was interested in the relationship between the university world and the policy world. I thought that was a strange thing. To be a student there and see these professors. I had a great professor when I was there named Alex DeWall, and I wrote a piece about him for Harper's Magazine in 2008. And the reason I did it was because I would be sitting in class and he would be telling these incredible stories. And I realized that he was not just a professor, he was, a back-channel diplomat. And I thought that transformation from, Indiana Jones, mild-mannered professor to daredevil archaeologist. So I thought that was dramatic and interesting. The difference is that nonfiction has to be fact-checkable, has to be as accurate as you were able to make it. I mean, that's just the simple, fundamental difference. There are all sorts of great lines and histories about the relationship between the two. I forget, people call one cabinet making and one sculpture, and there's all stuff like that. But if it's nonfiction and I say it's nonfiction, then you should be able to go and verify it. It's hard to do that, even with the best nonfiction, but I want to hold it to a standard of accuracy that would hold up in a court, even if it was a corrupt court. Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly interested in politics, and politics is just stories, that they're just stories, perceived, presented a different way. But I'm as interested in the natural world as I am in politics. And the middle of the 20th century and before that taught us a lot about reflexivity and the impossibility of objectivity and all of that stuff. But that doesn't mean that you cannot try to... Just because it's impossible to prove that anything is true doesn't mean that we stop the march of science. It's like the thing about geese, black and white. I mean, I can't prove causality, I can't prove anything to you, but I can try to push the ball forward, to use a sports metaphor.
Finally, brethren, after a while,